Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast to Coast Combat Hour, brought to you weekly by AllAccessMMA.com. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, Ed Carbajal. This week, we have the pleasure of welcoming back the best cutman in the business, Mr. Cutman Matt Marsden. Matt, thanks for coming back on the show, my man.
Man, what's up, guys? I'm just happy to be back.
Hey, dude, listen. So, it's been a while, and with the Bellator, everybody that listens to the podcast and follows you and stuff, they know you do a lot of cut man work for Bellator. They did the Fight for the Troops thing. I feel like a lot of people probably didn't know about your military background as much as they featured on that little clip that they showed during the event. So, my first two questions are: number one, did you know they were going to do that? And number two, just like when you saw that happening as you're working, like how did it feel being around that whole event and everything that they did?
So first, I knew that they were going to do something, but I didn't know what that something was. They
Mm-hmm.
had a week prior, they had asked me just general questions about like my service and AJ's service and things like that. And I knew that they were doing something, but didn't know what. So it kind of leads into your second question. They didn't actually play it in the arena. I didn't know it was happening.
Oh
So
wow.
they told me that it was airing at a specific time. And so I went out into the arena and we were kind of in between fights. And then I was talking to somebody else. I can't remember who. And I looked over at the deaf team's monitors, and I saw that it was because that's the live feed. And then I realized they were playing it for the people at home, and they didn't play it in the arena. So later on, they were able to send me a link, and it was really cool to see, Bert's as well. Like,
Yeah.
like there was several of us there that had
Hmm.
that background that we always kind of kept quiet, or not quiet so much, just as like a lot of us have it, so we didn't try and like exalt anybody above anybody else, and it was more about the fighters and those that had served from there.
Hmm.
But it was neat, and like you said, a lot of people didn't know, and they certainly didn't know that my wife AJ, who also works with us, had been in as well, and that's where we met. And I think that that's really what blew a lot of people's minds.
Does that add something to the show? I mean, you do shows all over the world. Is there something to be said for that military night? As someone who served, that because that's only military service people that are welcome to that event, correct? So, is the
That's
atmosphere different? Is there some pride that goes along when you get to kind of be a part of that show?
So they're just stoked to be there. I mean, nobody loves fighting more than military people who literally signed a contract to do that,
Hmm.
So like they're just super excited to be there, like in such a big event.
Hmm.
But whenever there is a fighter that also has a military background, it is insanity. Like they
Mm.
go crazy, and it's not any one service. It's not like, oh, she was a Marine, so we're all Army here. We're not going to do it. Nope. If they served and they're fighting someone that didn't serve, man, there's no doubt who that crowd was going to go for all night. And that's always kind of the most fun part for me. It's like the little bit of like the civilian rivalry that came from like the amateur shows back in the day that I used to do, like GIs versus Joes. Like it
Hmm.
kind of reminds me of those again.
Let me ask you. You kind of mentioned something that's part of one of the other questions I had because you said how you didn't see it when you were that night when you were there. You found it. You kind of saw it after the fact. I mean, since Bellator moved to they've changed where they air. A few times in recent, like maybe the last 2 years, they went from Paramount to CBS Sports, and now they're on Showtime. I'm wondering, like for you as somebody that's like on event for stuff like that, is there anything that kind of you noticed as far as things being different because they're on Showtime? And does it seem better organized? Sometimes when they're with a network or a higher profile network like Showtime, you'll notice like there's definitely more accommodations made and things like that. Do you notice anything like that, or is it just wrapping hands and fixing cuts for you?
I would say that what I notice is more of Showtime seems to understand a little bit more how to work with Bellator. And
Hmm.
I don't think that's because Showtime has a history with combat sports necessarily, because Spike did too.
Hmm.
But I think it's that they have a relationship with Scott, and that they know how to work well together from the time that Strikeforce was on them. So not only do they have a relationship with combat sports, but they have a specific relationship with Scott that seems to like be keeping everything on a very even keel. Like there's less surprises, I guess I would say. But from like an on the ground standpoint, like actually during the show, from like my perspective, no, it doesn't really change. It's all still the same directors and producers that we've had. Like they've stayed with us throughout our entire time. Whether we were on, like I still have the same executive producer now that I had on MTV2. Has followed us all the way through this.
So you don't have to deal. There's not a lot. Do you have a lot of Showtime employees, or is it basically just Showtime overseeing the same production that you had basically before?
Yeah, exactly that. So, budgets are under Showtime's umbrella, that sort of thing now. But as far as like on the ground, they really didn't make a lot of changes. They trusted that we had built up the correct team, and they've let us run with that. I mean, so far, I don't think we're messing up too bad. So,
No, it's I like the Showtime's always had a real clean
Yeah.
product. Going back to the boxing days, it's always in the Strike Force. It's always been super clean. You guys just got back from the first your first trip to Paris, France for an event. Second time?
yeah, we went during the pandemic, like
Mhm.
height, man. We were locked in
That's
our
right.
rooms and shit. It was awful.
Okay, but that was okay. That's right. And then we got and then you so when you got the Congo
Yeah.
Bader main event.
Yeah.
How are the fans in France? I know that obviously MMA was banned essentially for up until really I think Bellator kind of broke that ceiling on that. And now the UFC's talking about going out there. Um, is it a different fan base? Is it a younger knowledge of the sport kind of fan base, or is it no different than when you go to Ireland or
Uh,
London or anywhere else?
they were surprisingly knowledgeable. Like I hate to say that, but there just hasn't been a lot of MMA there, and
Mhm.
fans aren't used to live events, and so they sometimes you run into like more booing and things like that. Absolutely not the case in Paris. Like those fans. Well, first of all, it was just a great arena acoustically because there was nothing to deaden the sound in there, so it was just all like solid walls and bouncing like noise everywhere. So that part was great. But they didn't boo like when fights went to the ground. I didn't hear a lot of that like just stand them up like you hear other places. Like they weren't really upset. They were really really happy with all aspects of MMA, and they were like
Mhm.
aware of them. They knew they knew everything as if events had been happening in that country for 20 years.
Mhm.
So I mean, like I was really 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 stoked on the fans there. They were just great.
You're talking about that. It makes me think. Going back to Hawaii, I wrote a piece about something Scott Coker said, and I want to know if you kind of felt that as. I mean, somebody that you don't folks that don't know that haven't listened to other episodes you've been on. We know you do train in jujitsu. You do jujitsu before COVID. You used to do the show day rolls and stuff like that. I don't know if that's still a thing or not, but
We're trying to bring it back.
it's probably hard to bring back. But I mean, aside from that, the thing in Hawaii, Scott Coker at the post fight press conference, I had to write the piece on it because he just talked about the history Hawaii has with mixed martial arts and martial arts in general. And being that Bellator's been there a few times and you've been there a few times, I'm just wondering. I'm surprised I never asked you this before, but did you feel any of that like history and stuff like when you get to Hawaii? I mean, especially when you were able to do the show day rolls and stuff like that. Like, did you get to see how deep the combat sports culture runs in Hawaii? Because it was almost like folks forgot about it because of how far the sports come.
Yeah, there is an almost like frenetic energy in Hawaii when it
Mm,
comes to fighting. Like I can go to some places and fighting is like a round table circle of discussion, and everything is very organized. But when you go to Hawaii, fighting is fighting. Let's do it. If you're going to talk about it, let's do it. Like the
yeah.
energy is there, and it just brings a whole different aspect to a show and to the crowd. When you realize that 90% of the crowd could probably step into the cage and put on pretty good show themselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
like so it's just a really energetic atmosphere. It's really only comparable to Dublin, I would say.
Mm,
Like that level of energy and just let's up and go. Like
yeah.
those are the two places that I seem to get that. And the history of fighting in Hawaii, they're so proud of, and like I'm proud of. Like man, I get there and I'm like, man, I'm proud of you guys. Like you sold me the second I got here. Like I'm into
Yeah.
it now. And like even one of my other cutmen who comes in from the Netherlands to that Hawaii show, Like he stays extra days to go surfing. Like he's in the whole lifestyle, and he trains at all the gyms there too. And he's
Oh wow.
like he talks about how the jiu-jitsu is different there than even in the Netherlands and the kickboxing. So it's just it's its own thing. But I can only like boil it down to just how like energetic it feels. Like man, you just want to fight when you get there. Like
Yeah.
I mean, though I haven't been to Hawaii in probably about 15 years, but in like the mid 2000s, being out there, I have MMA gear left and right, so I was wearing something out at a bar, and even back in the mid 2000s, you didn't have people commenting on MMA like in public, but out there it was, hey, BJ pin this,
yeah,
Icon Sport, Super Brawl, you were able to go to a bar in 2006 and have a conversation with
like
in
a
MMA,
geek.
and that
Yeah,
didn't exist in Temecula in 2006 per se. Um,
absolutely.
uh, Something I was thinking about. We've had you on several times. When was the last time a cut stopped a fight in Bellator? Seems like you and your guys have been doing
Ooh.
a great job because I can't remember one.
Uh,
It's a
I
good point.
there was one. I want to say it was Paris on the undercard, and it was a pretty bad one if I remember correctly. I always tell people if they go sideways, it's not really
Yeah.
an issue, but if it's up and down, then we have a problem, and we had an up and down. But I'll tell you, between England and Paris, it was crazy. Like bloodbaths. Like I haven't had as much work as I had in those two shows in the prior 20 shows combined. I mean, they were just going for it in both
Yeah.
Paris and London. It was crazy. Like we were running like we were borrowing medication from each other because like we were running out.
Oh
Like
wow.
like putting calls in the back, like bring more help. It was wild there. But we did have one in I want to say it was Paris. It was either Paris or London, but I think it was Paris.
Hmm.
And it was right in the right on the side, right in the lid, diving into the eye. It was the right call, but it was fun.
Yeah. Is there any like when you're going to be at a place and based on like the story you just told, like so from learning from something like that, like planning for the next one when you're like, okay, things get a little crazy, you look at the card or whatever, you're like, okay, maybe we need to order some more whatever, anticoagulant or whatever it is you guys use. You know what I mean? Like now from that experience, especially with my other question, which I was gonna ask, was like, the transitions and the changes you've had to make, with COVID kind of lightening up on the COVID protocols and stuff like that. So how does that like change what to bring and prepare for upcoming events?
I definitely look at the card. The card is the biggest indicator for me. So
Mm.
if I see a card that's got a bunch of like Chandler types on it, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, and then I'm gonna bring extra. Then I'm like, make sure I'm bringing some extra swabs. Make sure I'm bringing, I use some
Yeah.
sanitary stuff there, and like I get the cards a little bit in advance, like usually a couple months in advance.
Mm.
And if I see it starting to get put together, and I'm like, man, this is a card full of like 45 and 55ers, and none of them know how to keep their hands up, then I'm definitely putting in an order to the pharmacy ahead of time.
Yeah.
But the guys that work bare knuckle they have to do that every time. Like it's
Oh,
a whole bottle per show for those, So like they have
wow.
to do that every time.
You bring up bare knuckle. They just recently had a show in your neighborhood out there in Orlando. Um, is are you allowed to work something like that, or are you under contract with Bellator if they were to offer you a night's worth of work?
Uh, it's a little fuzzy.
Mm.
I'll admit. So Bellator has something with me called right of first refusal. It's a contract I signed with them that basically says I have to give them the option first for any other show I would work. So I can't
Mm.
necessarily work, or I can't. I'm not prevented from working other shows. As a matter of fact, I'm working Karate Combat in on June 25th, right after
Oh,
the Memorial
nice.
Show. So I absolutely can, but they get the right to sort of veto the whole one. And while I did ask just ahead of time, they did not veto bare knuckle. Bellator did not tell me that I cannot work bare knuckle. It hasn't come up. They already
Yeah.
had a guy that was traveling down with them, and I'm not going to step on anybody's toes. So, but yeah, Bellator. So in this case, they did not, but Bellator can veto something, but they
So
never.
you're like the Kyla Harrison of Cutmen.
Yeah, basically, right? Matching offers, but they've always been really, really cool. I can't honestly think. I mean, unless I was going to try and work a different show on the same night as them, I think that would be the only time that they would tell me no.
Yeah, I don't see why they would say not to. I mean, if you can get another work another
Yeah, they
night
don't
that they're not
care.
on, yeah, that
Yeah, they don't
makes
care.
sense. And I know Coker and has been pretty like open and transparent about, anyone can do whatever they want as long as it doesn't conflict with,
Basically, yeah.
their
And that's the way
partners and things like
sponsorships
that.
work. That's the way other shows work. As long as it doesn't conflict with the big purse,
Hmm.
you can get whatever you want outside of that.
Yeah. So, like, what's funny? I was just when Matt said you were going to be able to come back on, I was just thinking. I was talking with my own training partners, about you and the fact that the whole fight for the troops thing. One of the guys I trained with, and he competes and everything, is a fellow black belt. Is also a veteran. He was a former combat medic, and he's like, he's starting to age out of his being able to compete and stuff. So
Yeah,
he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And I said to him, I was like, well, you should be a cut man. And then I was like, but you got to learn how to wrap hands first.
that's it.
Because,
I always tell everybody, I'm like, that's the hardest part.
Mhm,
Medically speaking, the hardest part transitioning from a regular medical role to a cut man role is the fact that in most regular medical roles, not always in a combat medic role,
mhm.
but in most regular medical roles, EMT, nurse, you have backup, you have people there, you have a team that you're working with,
Yeah.
at least a partner. You're in there by yourself. There's nobody to hand you something. There's nobody you can ask for something over your shoulder.
Mhm,
That is typically the hardest thing to learn medically is like you need to remember you have to do this whole thing by yourself.
mhm.
Other than that, it's wrapping hands. It's going to take you way longer. You are just going to need to
So
be there. Yeah.
so with the growth of MMA and combat sport, it seems like everybody wants to get into MMA in some factors. So like obviously, I mean, do you get like because don't you have like your own thing where you train folks under you like and like I don't know if it's like a company that you have or something like that because I know
I don't have anything official. I just,
mhm,
I don't tell people no. If
yeah,
you come to me in good faith and you want to learn, just understand that because I don't have a company and I'm not collecting money for this, you're
mhm,
not always going to be my first priority.
mhm,
But I don't really adhere to the old cut man way of doing things where we're supposed to keep everything secret. Like
mhm, yeah,
I'll tell anybody anything, and I'll tell you my philosophy on that is because if a coach comes up to me at a show and they want to know something and I can make them a little bit better, I know that at Bellator I'm there for them. But I know when they go back down to a regional show or an amateur show that there's
mhm,
not going to be a cut man there. So if I
mhm,
can give that coach something that helps a fighter in an amateur show 6 months later, I
yeah,
want to do that. Okay. And I don't want to charge that guy money for that. I know I'm weird for that, but I don't really care that much about that kind of
yeah.
shit. And I want to give him the tools to help his fighters the best he can or she can. You know what I mean? That's all I really care about.
Mhm.
So I absolutely do train people, but it's just you have to kind of come find me, sort of thing.
So
Ed, real quick, Ed, you mentioned the hand wraps. When I was talking to you yesterday, Matt, about possible topics, earlier Tuesday morning, Inouye, one of the pound for pound top boxers in the world, I believe he's 125 pound ish, 115, something like that. He defended his title, second round knockout over Daenerys in Tokyo, and there was a little bit of controversy about his hand wrap.
mm,
And I
Yeah.
asked you because there was a comment. I think like they're covering the whole hand as opposed to you might be able to break it down. I did ask you. You said it wasn't much of a big deal, but it is something that they do in Japan.
Yeah, it's pretty specifically Japan, and I think Thailand does it as well. So in the United States, every commission, boxing, MMA, whatever, when you're wrapping hands, you have to start with gauze. Okay, you do
mhm,
gauze and then you do tape. To do tape, gauze, and tape is what's called double taping. Okay, and it's the difference between a weaponized hand wrap, okay, and a protective hand wrap. I wrap hands to keep you from breaking your hand so you can punch your opponent as hard as you possibly can and not hurt yourself. Whereas double taping kind of creates a weaponized hand wrap, all right, that is more about making the hardest punching surface,
mm,
okay, as opposed to protecting the hands. Now, it's weird because that's actually how Japan does it. That's how. So when we did our New Year's Eve show, we did our Bellator show that Thursday, I think it was, and that was under American Commission rules, which is how AJ was able to be like the first female cut person, right? Because they'd never even done cuts before.
mm,
So we get there and I'm rapping my way, and the Japanese commission is like, "What the hell are you doing?" You know what I mean? And then the night that they're fighting, so it was like the night that Patricky was in their tournament. I see what they're doing, and I equally, what the hell are you doing? That is the most illegal thing I've ever seen. And they're like, what you did was illegal. What are
Oh
you
wow.
talking about? So it was a real weird thing. But I will tell you this. Not to toot our own horn over here in the West, but they are having a major problem right now with broken hands all through Risen. And I can tell you it's those hand wraps, okay, because they're making hard surfaces that are making it easier actually to break the hand, right? Because, like, if you put a rock on the front of your hand and hit somebody, they got hit by a rock, but so did your hand. You know,
Yeah.
your hand got hit by a rock too on the other side of their face. So
Yeah.
they're creating, what probably feels really good to the fighter, but would absolutely be illegal over here if they tried to like rematch over here in Vegas or something, for instance. Like, absolutely not allowed.
So I mean, that makes me wonder if, like, do you think that there should be, how like there's the unified rules of MMA, and there's all these things that kind of go across the board. Do you think they should do that for the sport globally? I mean, if a promotion self-regulates it, of course they're going to do what everyone's used to. But when you go to some place like you said, like Risen, and they're doing these freaking the glass
Yeah,
Van, you know what I mean?
right. Um, I guess the way I would like to handle that is, okay, you guys see that you're having a bit of a broken hand problem.
Hmm.
You realize that you're doing this in a different way than anyone else is, and we're willing to show you the way we're doing it. Please, let us teach you if that's what you
Yeah.
want. I think communication is the key there.
Yeah.
I would never want to try and force that on them. I mean, it's been working for them for a long time. But if they wanted to try something different, I think that it would make a lot of other people happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing that I find interesting about that, and the first thing that popped into my head is, could that have been we look back with nostalgia about Pride, but Pride had a lot of fights that were just barn burners.
Brutal.
And you talk about wrapping your hand like that and it making your hand feel better. I'm wondering, but then we also have guys now. Vochanchin had about 50 bare knuckled fights before he got into
Yeah,
Pride, but his hands broke down in Pride. I think even Fedor had some issues with his hands, if I
Hmm.
remember
Well,
correctly,
yeah,
in
that's a
the
good
mid
point.
2000s.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
so A, I wonder if that led to some of those issues, and B,
Yeah.
is that why they were able to stand in the pocket and just throw with reckless abandonment? And while obviously it feels like you're getting hit with a rock, you're also throwing rocks.
rolling
So,
rocks, exactly. I mean,
you
that's
know,
the positive to it. I mean, yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I hadn't really thought of it, but yeah, I mean, when you kind of pour it out on the table like that, yeah, I mean, it's likely at
it
least
makes some
worse.
sense if
Yeah,
it can kind of make you a little bionic as far as ready to, hit someone over the
Yeah.
head with a rock. It's easier to stand in the middle of that ring and
it just
swing for the fence.
if you were to walk up and like put your thumbs on my hand wraps, I mean, they would feel solid, but you would feel that they were gauze pads, all right, and the tape was holding everything in.
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
walk up to theirs, it's literally like a cast.
That's what
When
I
it comes
figured.
to anything
Yeah.
like that, yeah, and that's when I mean, how hard if somebody put a plaster or fiberglass cast on your hand, all right, and it's not injured, and said throw a punch, I mean, you'd probably go pretty ham on somebody with
Yeah.
that thing, and they
So
just
a lot different than like the plaster of Paris Margarito issue maybe of
yeah,
about a decade
they're
ago.
not that hard. I would say like that's at an 11.
Hmm.
Okay,
Okay.
I would put these at like a 7 or an 8, and I would put like a normal Western hand wrap as far as like weaponization goes at
Hmm.
like a 5, like a
Okay.
neutral. You know.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, listen, I don't mean to cut it short, but I have another interview scheduled in like 5 minutes. So, I do appreciate you taking some time to talk, and it's always fun. I think I'm going to see you in a couple of weeks if
Awesome,
you're
man.
in
Yeah, I'm
Connecticut.
absolutely gonna be there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if I can pack my gear or whatever. I'll probably won't do it just to be. I'm sure there's still some sort of protocols going
Well,
on.
we're just kind of bootlegging it now whenever we can.
Yeah, I mean it's understandable. I mean technically we are still in the pandemic, so we got to play it as safe as possible. But if is there anything like your sponsors and stuff you want to plug before we say
Uh,
goodbye?
I'd just like to give a shout out to Mod Cabin. As you guys see, I keep changing like my facial hair like every week. I had a mustache last week, everything. But They've always been there. Every time I change up my face, Mod Cabin's like, here's more grooming products for whatever you got going on. So just if people could take a look at Mod Cabin, that would be awesome.
Awesome. Before we sign off here, real quick, Glover or Yuri?
Oh, Glover, Glover for history's sake.
Yeah. I think we're all. I mean, I want Glover to win. I'll say
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
My heart says Glover, so I'll go with that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, fans can check out the show at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast to Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me, Matthew Hawkins, at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, Carbeerzol on Instagram, Old Head Carb on Twitch, and you can always check out our podcast at allaccessmma.com. Thanks for your time, Matt. Appreciate the chat, and hopefully get out to the West Coast here so I can bug you at one of these events sooner than later.
Hopefully soon, man. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and hopefully they don't keep me too far. If I get approved and I see you in a couple of weeks, they let me at least say hello to you.
Oh yeah, it's not normal, man. It's
All right, man. See you.